Hello, my name is Isaac and welcome to my channel Guardians for Zion that defends the doctrines of Zion so that we can all build unity of heart and mind. One of the doctrines that need better defense in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the law of tithing. Former members of the Church of Jesus Christ have three major claims about what tithing should look like in a truly inspired church. I have addressed the first two claims in previous videos, and these will be linked in the description. The third claim, which will be addressed, is the claim that church leaders emphasize tithing. And the purpose of emphasizing tithing is to prioritize accumulation of wealth. And they use that wealth in ways that is seen inconsistent with the spiritual purposes of tithing and of the church. So let's dive right in and grant this claim. And also grant that the mission of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints remains the same. What is your proposed method of financial system that would propel the church in its mission and its scope and its effectiveness? Now, to answer this question, how about we look at the different systems that exist for different churches and see how they would scale with the LDS mission, which is unique, with temples and the global outreach and central authority using the other systems. So first, let's talk about solely voluntary church donations. This may be called a tithe by church leaders and other churches, but is not actually 10% of anything. It's just in reference to an offering. Most Protestant churches operate on a voluntary congregational giving system without a centralized enforceable percentage requirement across the denomination of 10%, let's say. Those some are very, very good and emphasize that tithing is biblical and how to calculate that. One of the other figures that I saw online was that Protestant evangelical churches had members give between 2 and 8% of their income to the church, depending on their local leadership's emphasis on tithing and the culture around giving tithing and charitable funds to a church. Some people are very skeptical about giving to theological institutions, but 2 to 8% is quite a large range. But that's about what they give. They achieve this by weekly offerings during worship services. Some emphasize biblical tithing. Some have special fundraisers for missions. Others have subscriptions to content that they put out online and other programs. They also have business investments in projects and receive endowments from larger entities. Largely, Protestants will give tithes and offerings if there is a strong culture to give. Strong doctrinal teaching on the importance of tithing and charity sometimes lacking in the evangelical Protestant communities. And also trust and leadership is super important. These characteristics are consistent across most religious organizations. So those characteristics are orthodoxy, orthopraxy, and faith in the leadership. If they don't have these three characteristics, the organization will suffer and dissolve in time. So in an equation form, we can say that revenue equals local culture of giving, local teaching of giving, and local trust and leaderships in managing those funds. This means that perhaps if 15% of pastors don't emphasize giving, then you don't just lose the 15% of Protestant giving, you also create instability and long-term planning becomes unpredictable, often leading to aggressive donation campaigns, borrowing loans for financial institutions, or selling up and moving on. We actually see this pattern in the early history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as well, where they tried strictly voluntary offerings and didn't ask for very much at all, but without a clear doctrine on tithes and offerings, on how much they should give, the church struggled to raise funds to build a community and build a temple, which was required by the revelations received. Now, if you believe in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints' mission to help all of God's children come to Jesus Christ through learning about his gospel, making and keeping promises or covenants with God, and practicing Christ-like love and service, you will understand that the scope of this mission is very large. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints operates in 180 or more of the 195 countries that exist in the world. There are hundreds of temples and a global missionary program, as well as educational programs. Now, that requires very steady revenue, sustainable source, at least some centralized allocation of resources, and long-term planning. If you can't fund a mission long-term, why would you then take the risk to expand its reach? It wouldn't be sustainable. A decentralized system of organization has problems. It wouldn't be able to allocate resources in a centralized way. So a decentralized church would make it difficult to build temples in low-income countries, send missionaries from low-income countries, provide global welfare relief, or even maintain the uniformity of doctrine through the printing of materials and websites, for example. So a congregational, like a local funding model, works well for autonomous local churches, but it can't scale to a unified mission for covenant creation and maintenance, at least on the scale of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints through temple covenants. So let's also compare Catholic finances. They are much on the same principle as the Protestants, with the local leadership needs to be teaching and encouraging, and the local culture needs to be very strong with the giving, with the offerings and with the tithes. They don't just have one bank account in the Catholic Church. They have thousands of local parishes around the world that operate. And then the diocese, or the bishopric, which is a lot further up in authority than our Latter-day Saint bishoprics. Then religious and charitable arms, and the Vatican itself. Each are responsible for their separate assets, budgets, and accounts. So it's a mix of decentralized finances with central authority. With central authority, if they have surpluses, subsidize the local parishes, as well as paying for the bishop, cardinal salaries, and their pensions, if they have any. And because it's largely a decentralized financial system, it's very difficult to assess how big the asset portfolio of the Catholic Church is. And the Catholic Church has been around a lot longer, so it has a large asset portfolio, which they can then either sell for profit or invest and receive dividends and interest off financial investments, and rental and other income off of real estate and commercial activities. Generally, and this is a statistic I saw online as well, Catholics donate between 1% and 2% of their personal income to the church. Its asset base reduces its reliance on members, and probably reduces the culture of giving from members if they see that the church has such a large portfolio of assets. Now, the Catholic Church has been around for 1700 years or so and accumulated property and endowments. And it's very messy in its financial history as well as its mainstream history. And they've been receiving surpluses for the last few years, which is good for them. And they continue to expect surpluses, but they've had to cut a lot of costs, including salaries for their cardinals and bishops, to try and balance the budget. The Vatican had been in deficits for many years. Vatican's the central authority. While in comparing to the Latter-day Saint Church, is only about 196 years old, and at any time it wasn't in symbiosis with the government. It also lost a lot of its legitimately purchased property to mob violence repeatedly through the 1800s, but miraculously recovered on the tithes and the offerings of its members. The Latter-day Saint Church is solely centralized in its finances. So all donations go to the church office building, and all costs are paid through the top down, allocated top down through the different levels of the church to fund the maintenance of church buildings, construction of new ones, and of temples, as well as all the missionary work that the church does. The Latter-day Saint Church does not pay local leaders, bishops, stake presidents, and area authorities, 70s. So those are all voluntary positions. There is no concept of a Latter-day Saint pension for general authorities, and I'm not sure if they have pensions for the employees of the church. Many leaders in the Quorum of 70s are there only temporarily as well in the general authority. And the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 Apostles are uniquely paid with the investment gains on the church's capital investments. Now, these are compared to the US public school administrator average salaries. But for the amount of work that these general authorities do, they're working around the clock, 7 days a week. They don't get breaks. Very rarely. So, it's arguable that they should be receiving more for their time. But they don't exist to get rich, and it's not supported by any of the data that I can find. There is strict teaching on LDS tithing that tithing is 10% of income, though income is left to interpretation by the members. All Latter-day Saint members made a commitment at their baptismal covenant to give 10% of tithing. Despite only being a 200-year-old institution, the Church of Jesus Christ has massive wealth accumulation, with estimates of $300 billion in assets by non-independent analysts, which is way more than the annual gross domestic product, GDP, of New Zealand. According to the Widow's Mite report, most income in the LDS Church does not even come from the tithes and offerings of members anymore. It comes from the investment gains. The church doesn't carry any debt, which allows 100% of the profits on tithing and investment to go into the mission of the church, where it can be spending it, reinvesting it, or saving it to grow opportunity and aid around the world, instead of a portion of that, if you have debt, going to the bankers. So the financial structure of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is uniquely designed to sustain global expansion. without reliance on debt or state funding. So hopefully that addresses the claim in part of why the church needs wealth to operate its mission. Now, the next part of the claim, is accumulation the mission, or is accumulation the strategy and service of its mission? So let's look at the doctrine of why the church's portfolio is so large compared to other institutions. Everyone's taught to sacrifice. Sacrifices is a way to show God that we are willing to make covenants and keep them. In my second video, I explained the doctrine of the church largely in detail, the primary doctrine of tithing. Now, secondary doctrine is that the church teaches members to live within their means through discipline, avoid unnecessary debt or financial slavery, save for hard times, be self-reliant, and invest in the future. Now, is the Church of Jesus Christ consistent in living these financial principles? Yes, they live within their means, and as a result, they don't have any more debt. The church also teaches to save for hard times, and we know that church administrators' defense of the large portfolio often includes that they are saving for a rainy day or the rainy day, in reference to the second coming. We talked about the second coming in the last video as a primary doctrine of why we tithe. The church also teaches members to save for a rainy day and invest for the future and diversify assets to protect against speculative returns. And this is just good financial management, good financial stewardship. So yes, the church practices what it preaches, and many institutions around the world, like most institutions, don't practice this. These secondary principles. Many religious institutions operate close to break even. They have limited reserves and rely heavily on annual giving and annual budgets to achieve its mission, and they close congregations in times of financial downturn. Now, another way to approach it is accumulating wealth consistent with the mission of Jesus Christ. Well, technically, yes. He wants us to work hard, be disciplined, and free spiritually from bondage, as well as financially from bondage. The less leverage a bank has on you, the better decisions you're more likely to make with how you spend your time and where you put your money, as well as carrying out the mission of the church to keep covenants, preach the gospel, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and shelter the homeless. You can't do that if you don't have anywhere for the homeless to go, any shelter. You can't have that if you can't afford to buy the naked clothes, and you can't feed the hungry if you can't feed your family. So at least in those points, the church practices what it preaches, and it is sustainable. What about the church as humanitarians? Many people say that the church could do more good with $300 billion, and yes, they probably could. But what do you want the church to do with the $300 billion? Do you want them to just distribute it all to the members? $300 billion is estimated and not a verified number, and that also includes land assets, which aren't liquid, like stocks, bonds, cash. For argument's sake, let's say that it is liquid, the 300 billion, and you distributed it all to 17 million of the 8 million members who, the 17 million who aren't wealthy. That's $17,647 distributed per member. Now that would meaningfully impact and change a lot of poor members' lives, those who live in poverty, but it would benefit disproportionately the third world countries more than members in the first world countries. So $17,000 couldn't even pay a bill for a new roof needed on my 120 square metre house and one of the least affluent towns in New Zealand. But it would allow many African and South American members, for example, to study, to buy homes, to create businesses, etc. Or there's also the potential that these large, if the church was to distribute all of its wealth at one single time to its members, how many of the members are actually likely to keep that 17,000 and not lose it to corrupt governments or to people who would plunder and take these funds? But let's say that there's no violence or theft. The church would be left with $0 in assets, in investment assets, and not be able to generate any investment returns, which puts reliance solely back on the backs of members' income tithes. And during a global downturn where lots of people lose their jobs, there may not be enough to fund the maintenance of church properties, and then we're just like everyone else, where we have to sell church assets to be better off financially, to cover costs. That's not sustainable. So one-time distribution of all of his investment is not very good or transformative to many members, and would be destructive to the church as an organization. Now, let's say a more conservative approach to distributing church finances would be to distribute 50% of all of its profits, income, and invest the other 50%. So let's estimate a total surplus of around $10 billion a year. Now 50% of that is of course $5 billion, which is only $3 billion more than is currently given in humanitarian and welfare aid. Now this ignores value of volunteered hours from the members and voluntary donations directly to communities from the members. So that's distributing $5 billion to 17 million members is about $300 per member annually. Now that barely covers a week's worth of food for first world countries, and it would have the potential to create dependency for third world members on that check of $300 a year. It's a lot less likely to be stolen, though. The church does not want to create dependency. It's a church that preaches self-reliance, and the church already spends, I think what I saw was between $350 million to $800 million on church welfare, which is for the members who struggle financially. Now, dependency creates idleness, and idleness is a sin. So the church wants to avoid that as much as possible. Now, at the end of the day, could the church be giving more than $5 more than 1.5 to 2 billion that it's estimated that it gives each year. Yes, it probably could increase it to about 4 or 5 billion to still be sustainable. Should it? Well, that depends. If an institution's primary mission is spiritual transformation, and then secondary is social welfare, what is the acceptable allocation ratio that the church should use? Now, I haven't heard critics give a honest critique of that. Even if the church is only doing half of what it could be doing, it's still doing a lot more good than keeping all of its wealth for itself. Now, there's controversy about how the church uses its tithes, which addresses the last two parts of the claim that we're addressing today. And funding the construction of, let's say, the City Creek Mall, which is in Salt Lake City. The church will be funding it from the financial profits that they have reserved, which ultimately was derived from the tithing many years ago. But the mall would be making profit from leasing spaces to businesses with their local or like big businesses. But it creates economic benefits more than just church profits. The profits from the leases will fund greater growth and humanitarian outreach, as well as creating more local jobs for people so that they can feed their families. So the whole local community benefits from an investment like this, and also the nation benefits from investments like these. If every big organization invested in things like this, it would boost, would drop unemployment and increase wages across the countries. And it's not unusual at all for churches to have commercial activities to fund their missions. So this is no exception to that. Would it be inappropriate or immoral for a religious institution to own productive assets? I mean, for many members who have a problem with tithing, say that the church can do it by themselves without asking for tithes. And yes, that's true. Most of the income generated from the church is actually from the investments rather than from the tithes. But that doesn't take away the doctrine of tithing and the importance of sacrificing your idol of money for something better, which is being worthy, having covenants, making covenants, allowing others to make covenants. There's also the controversy about the church allegedly hiding its money and the SEC fine that happened in 2023. The church was splitting its investment portfolio over different shell companies, corporations, and many had a problem with that. Is it wrong? Well, that depends by what standard you judge. So if you're judging by the government standards, then yeah, the SEC fine was because the church was not up to the standards that was not reporting its investments up to the standards that the government wants. Well, if you judge by God's standards, is it immoral? Well, if you deliberately violate any law, you're making a moral claim, whether you admit it or not. So, for example, if you break a government law, you're saying the law lacks legitimacy, obedience would cause greater harm, or a higher duty overrides it, like a duty to God. And a moral failure usually involves causing unjust harm, deception for personal gain, exploitation, betrayal of trust, and violation of agreed standards. Now, if we ask the question again, was it immoral? Well, did the SEC case involve theft, personal enrichment, embezzlement, or lavish diversion of funds? No, no, it didn't. It was just determined by the government that it was an obscured portfolio, and they tapped a $5 million fine on it. Was it wrong morally? Well, moral gravity of this is much lower than many corruption scandals involving pastors buying jets or personally enriching themselves with these mansions. Church doesn't do that, and there's plenty of evidence that they don't. Does the government use their money in moral ways? Well, a lot less so than a $1 billion corporation and $1 billion churches. As we approach the end of this video, I'll ask, what is the best way to approach humanitarian efforts? It's widely debated in a secular sense what the best way to approach humanitarian efforts is. If it's one distribution of a small amount to third world citizens, or larger donations, or consistent giving. It's debated. There's different evidence for different ones, depending on where they are. Spiritually, I believe that the church has the right approach on getting its members to make and keep covenants of consecration. And we'll talk more about this in a different video at some point. But spiritually, the Lord works from the inside out. The world works from the outside in. The world would take people out of the slums. Christ takes the slums out of people, and then they take themselves out of the slums. The world would mold men by changing their environment, and Christ changes men who change their environment. And the world would shape human behavior, but Christ can change human nature. That's a quote from Ezra Taft Benson, president of the church a few presidents ago. By funding the preaching of the gospel and environments to make and keep sacred covenants, like the temples, can change our hearts to look outwardly to others. And if everyone in the church did that, and if everyone in the world did that, we would live a completely different world. As Melchizedek did with the righteous people who are working towards getting people out of poverty, so they can be a Zion-like people, we could do the same. It starts transforming the self, not from redistributing all of the wealth. So practicing the gospel, as well as inspired principles of self-reliance, stewardship, debt avoidance, and covenant creation, welfare through community, and long-term planning, as well as other financial principles, is better, more transformative than redistributing funds. On the basis of sustainability, I believe that our sacred funds are being used wisely by our leaders and the presiding bishopric. They are not primarily using or leveraging the doctrine of tithing to accumulate wealth in ways that are seen as inconsistent with the church's mission. And they're not using tithing as leverage at all. President Elder Bednar said that the church doesn't need tithing. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't give tithing. It just means that the church no longer needs it to be sustainable. Will leaders make mistakes? Yes, certainly, as is the case with humanitarian resources falling into the hands of terrorist organizations. But they do a lot of good. Not the terrorist organizations, but the church does a lot of good with the funds that they allocate to different charities around the world. Now, if this approach to finances is practiced on the individual, family, and community level, as well as national and global, it has the ability to transform people and places in the whole world into Zion. Our approach on humanitarian efforts should be community-based from the bottom. We can change our environments through grassroots efforts after having our hearts aligned with Christ. I hope this video helps you understand the third critical claim, that the unique approach and mission with church finances actually is common sense and does not support the claim that leaders are prioritizing wealth accumulation through leveraging tithing and using them in ways inconsistent to the nature and mission of the church. Now that concludes our series of the three major claims of former or current members who are critical of tithing practices in the current Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'll probably do more tithing related videos in the future, so let me know in the comments if you understand anything differently, or you have a different opinion to me. Leave a like if you learned something new, and subscribe if you want to follow for more content about tithing and about guarding the doctrines of Zion from inside and outside voices. See you next time.